The Wildcats secondary have some big shoes to fill in 2025. Well, sophomore Zashon Rich is one who clearly has what it takes to take the next big step forward.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Joe Tillery joining me to close out the week of Wildcat chatter here on Locked On Kansas State. You can find all of his amazing work at Joe Tillery. You just dropped some sweet knowledge about how you grew your channel so far this year. And you're very close to 3,000 subscribers. If you can listen to him, you know that he's going to be hopefully getting that tattoo very, very soon. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We got a lot to talk about on this show. It's a fun one to end the week, really, Joe. And we're going to talk some Kansas State football because, you know, what a perfect time to talk about Kansas State football in the middle of February, right? There's no bad time to talk Kansas State football, in my opinion. And we're going to get to the secondary and what I think is a very interesting conversation, a very interesting topic heading into the new year, and really a lot of question marks about what is going to be. That's probably why it's an interesting topic. But Joe, before I continue to just talk my blabs out here, welcome to the show. And what do you think about this Kansas State secondary in 2025?
Well, man, you know, it's always an honor to be here, and I appreciate you having me. But man, it's interesting. I got to tell you what, there's some young talent there, and I know we'll get into that. But you know, I kind of thought about this leading up to the show. I thought a little bit over, and I was like, you know, you don't necessarily see wholesale change in the secondary every single season. The era of the transfer portal has commanded that a lot in college athletics, but you know, Chris Kleiman has been a guy that's built the program to stabilize even in a weird time. But you had two guys that have been there for multiple years. Obviously, Keenan Garber with his ups and downs, you know, when it has had really good moments, also really tough moments. And then obviously Jacob Parrish going to go to the league and be a stud corner up there for a decade or so. But you don't necessarily see both your starting guys leave at the same time and cause that wholesale change where it's, okay, we have to look to the future right now. And I think they've built it ready. I think they know the task at hand. They've got some young guys we saw already make some plays. But man, it's just it's going to be an interesting thing to watch through the upcoming season.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think there's a little bit of upperclassmen talk we need to have on this conversation, but most of this is going to be focused on the young players that can make a huge impact because I think there are plenty. Actually, I think there's multiple players who can make an impact, not only maybe with the corners, but the secondary as a whole. And we're going to get to that as a conversation today. The main person that I want to talk about is somebody that we saw for firsthand really kind of grow before us, like right before our eyes in the Rape Bowl this past bowl season, and that's Zashon Rich. I thought he had a really good bowl game. There were some moments where we saw some growing pains. There was like a deep pass where that happened, but overall, I thought he played a really good game in the bowl game. And Kansas State's finally updated their roster on their website to the spring 2025 roster. And with that being said, they've added bios to 2024. I want to read to you what Kansas State says about Zashon Rich and what happened last season. And then I kind of want to go into perspective about what I expect moving forward. And I'm going to go verbatim here. It said in 2024, he played in every game as a reserve defensive back, totaling 12 tackles and 3 pass breakups over 112 defensive snaps. While he also saw time at 159 total special teams plays as a member of the kickoff coverage, punt coverage, and punt return coverage, recording a season high 4 tackles and 2 pass breakups in that Rape Bowl against Rutgers on a season high 39 defensive snaps. His final tackle against the Scarlet Knights came in a 4th down attempt with under 2 minutes left to preserve the win. He had 2 tackles in his first appearance on defense against Colorado, and he had 2 stops against Arizona State and a broke-up pass against Cincinnati. Not a bad little bio for your freshman season as exactly what it says in the first sentence, a reserve defensive back. We saw him start off as a really just a building project in 2024 to what it appears to be a potential starting cornerback in 2025. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's a dang good bio for a true freshman kid to have stepping on the football field behind, a dude that's going to the NFL and Jacob Parrish, another stud, multi-year corner, I would say, in Keenan Garber. But, I think they're going to lean to him. I think he's going to be a starting cornerback this next season. Like, it's kind of crazy to sit there and say, okay, a true sophomore corner starting opposite, whoever starts at the opposite side. And we could be looking at two young guys, multiple young guys starting at that
Yeah.
spot, but it's a dude that deserves the honor. Like he really did grow before our eyes. I know that early deep pass you mentioned, that stunk. It just is what it is. But I don't know that I've seen development that fast over the course of a game where it's really piqued everybody in the fan base at the same time. Like I think sometimes you get guys that will make one big splash play and then have the fan base will be like, hey, this kid's really good. And then other people will discredit it and say, well, it's just one play. It's just one moment, one game. I feel like across the board, the majority of K-State fans realize like, hey, we got one in Zashon Rich. This kid's ready for the next step. And it kind of took me back to the Sugar Bowl game in 2022 against Alabama when you saw a true freshman VJ Payne get thrown out into the fire because you had so many injuries. And now look at the impact that VJ had even as a sophomore that next season. Said, okay, kid, here's the keys. You're going to be a starter next season. That early development where you see it in a bowl game transition into, okay, I'm now going to have to play 12 games. Those moments are so big when you go through the offseason knowing, okay, I got my taste as the starter. I'm not letting go of the reins. This is my team right now.
I'm so glad you brought up Payne because I didn't even put that two and two together, but that makes so much sense. And that even makes me even more excited about what Rich can do this coming season. Because if we get that type of trajectory, then I think we're in a lot better of a situation than what some or many might expect heading into this new year. PFF had a grade of him overall, defensive grade of 62.8. Nothing special, but then again, you got to remember that a lot of his snaps during the regular season were on special teams, didn't have a lot. His pass rush grade, 58.7. I mean, pass rush, we're talking about a corner here. Coverage grade was higher than his overall defensive grade. It was close to 64. It was a 63.4, and his run defense, 57.9. Again, the most snaps he had all season long was in that bowl game. And you got to think, and I think we did see him grow right before our eyes, like I mentioned. That long pass that happened, I believe it was in the first half, if I remember correctly. He could have easily took a step back and, took that as a learning issue, if you will, or as a learning moment. And then struggled the rest of the game. He did not. And I think that is the biggest thing that I took from this is that you gave up a big play, arguably the biggest play of the game for Rutgers. And you still stepped in there. You were strong. You played great the rest of the game. And as you mentioned in his bio, one of the game-winning plays was from Rich on a fourth down play at the end of the game. That's something that you get to bring into. You brought in as a freshman, and now going into your sophomore season, you have another opportunity to take the next step forward, potentially become a leader on the defense, and make a bigger impact for the way this team performs in 2025. Is it unfair that we are maybe throwing a little bit too much hope in a guy like Zashon Rich after only seeing what we saw in the bowl game, or do you think it is fair and it's what we should expect?
It's tough. It is tough because you understand, okay, this is a kid that started, one or two games in his career, I think one in the Rate Bowl, and hasn't had a ton of impact because he is a true freshman, but the kid wasn't ever really said, okay, you know what, this is your spot, you're starting here. I almost think the idea of what is fair and what is unfair is almost a question that like I've kind of pushed the brakes on in terms of this new transfer portal era, like where guys get paid as much as they do. And obviously, as a true freshman kid, depending on the stature of what you are as a recruit, like Zashon Rich, 3-star kid, top 2,000 prospect, isn't going to be getting paid the same way a 5-star type kid that's a top 20 prospect is. But
Sure.
because these kids are NIL driven and they're guys that, hey, you're getting paid to perform, the expectations almost go out the window of what you can and can't expect. It's what are you going to see on the spring roster translate into, okay, this dude's going to be a starter. We got to lock in. And I think Zashon Rich, like, the one thing that I think I come back to is I think every good corner has this idea, and it kind of goes the same way with receivers of you will not get the best of me. You will not catch a pass on me. I'll strap you up no matter who it is. I don't care if it's, Justin Jefferson. I don't care if it's a JV kid, from Blue Valley Southwest. Like it doesn't matter to certain corners. They're going out there and saying, you're not catching a ball on me. That confidence shows Zashon Rich. Like you said, it easily could have just pulled up on that play where they completed the long ball, said, okay, I'm 2 steps behind. I don't need to run this guy down. I've already given up 60. Just phone it in, touchdown, move on to the next play. He didn't. Sprints down, makes the tackle, and then has an incredible game from there on out. Like, it feels like he's a dude that has the right mentality. And I almost wonder if, like, he has the physical tools, he has the mentality. The mentality is the thing that I'd say, okay, place the expectations on the kid. He's ready for this. But when you have guys that just have talent that don't necessarily have the next level, mentality about the approach they're going into, that's where I start to say, well, is it too much to expect it? This kid feels like the perfect package of both.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see what we see from him in spring ball and hopefully continues on into Dublin and the rest of the season because I'm really high on a guy like Rich this season. And I think And I think you're right. I think it is okay to feel this way heading into the new season. I want to get more into some of these other young players that I was impressed with in the Rape Bowl and what I think they could do in 2025 and how they can impact this squad. And then, of course, I want to talk about some of these upperclassmen who have to fill the shoes of guys like Jacob Parrish. We'll do that all here next on Locked On Kansas State. Attention, Locked On Kansas State fans. The future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans didn't have a clear way to direct support to the athletes they love. Now, with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support the Kansas State athletics in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app today in the App Store and start backing Kansas State athletics the way they deserve, with transparency and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, for your second listen of the day, check out Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll and the rest of the Big 12 squad have you covered, taking down everything in the Big 12 conference. And make sure you go ahead and click that link below and check out Joe Tillery's YouTube page. He is very close to 3,000 subscribers. So make that your second and your third listen of the day. We're talking Kansas State secondary on today's episode of Locked On Kansas State. If you haven't already, do me a favor, hit that like, subscribe, leave a comment. I want to know your thoughts about this secondary and where you think they sit right now. I want to hear your hottest take in the month of February. Leave that in the comment description below, because there is plenty to talk about here when it comes to Kansas State football. Zashon Rich, I think, is going to be a really good player in 2025, but I don't think he's going to be the only young player that impresses me that is returning from Kansas State. Now, there's some transfers, and we're going to get to them in just a minute, but I want to talk about a couple players that first impressed me in that Rape Bowl that I think could make a huge impact, or at least more of an impact than they did in this past season. First off, I'm going to go with another sophomore heading into this year, Donovan McIntosh. I thought he looked really good in the Rape Bowl as well. 6'3" corner out of St. Louis. I'm really looking to see what he can do this next season. And then I'm going to go with, I believe he's considered a safety in this one, but Jack Fabris. I really liked what I saw from him in the Rape Bowl. Nothing special. You'd have to actually watch the game and not really pay attention to the box score, but you'd have to pay attention, rewatch the game on defense and see his type of play and performance. But what I saw from him, to me, screams like the next big role player for this defensive secondary. So I'm really excited from Donovan McIntosh and Jack Fabris. What's your thoughts about those two?
I think it's a good question because obviously I would say the bigger name on paper would be Donovan McIntosh at this present moment, because the role is more defined of what we need earlier on. Like, you've got multiple guys in the safety room that are going to cloud that position a little bit. But I liked what I saw from both dudes. I think you hit the nail on the head. For Donovan McIntosh, you got to love the intangibles already. 6'3" is huge in the corner. Obviously, we as K-State fans know all about Julius Brents, and his time here, how good of a player he was. Size isn't everything, though. But this dude seems to have it figured out. I don't want to just, say that both guys are going to be NFL-bound, incredible DBs, but, like, you've seen talent, you've seen flashes. It would not surprise me to see these two dudes in a four-man rotation where they're playing, 60% of the snaps for Kansas State, whether it be one guy's playing, 90% of the defensive snaps, one guy's playing 30, whatever the case is, however you would add that up. But I feel like there's going to be a good rotation that features both dudes. For Jack Fabris, I think a lot of people also forget he played early in the year. Like, he played throughout the non-con schedule, and a massive play with Austin Roman in the Tulane game. Jack Fabris was the guy that picked up that fumble forced by Austin Roman and cribbed it 60 yards of the house against Tulane. Like, he's a dude that finds his way around the football. Just a guy that kind of screams Denzel Goolsby a little bit to me, like a quicker version of him, where he's just in the right place at the right time, making the right plays. And it's still early. He's young. He's going to have some moments. I know there's a couple flashes here and there that may not have helped him out in the box score. But overall, I do feel like, I get a weird feeling that 2 years from now, he's going to be a dude that we're going to say, okay, this is a first team All Big 12 type player off the rip.
I have a suggestion for your YouTube channel, man, because you
Mm.
make me excited when you talk about it. You got to do some more of those player comps from past Kansas State comps to these new guys, because it gets me excited because you make so much more sense when you say it. I love it. Absolutely
Thank
love
you.
it. I'm with you though. I really do think that there is an opportunity for both those players to make a step forward in 2025, and I think it's needed. I think if you had an opportunity to have a type of rotation and feel okay with that, have a trustworthy group of corners where you're okay with making a rotation, that is huge. That would be electric for going into not even just non-conference. Like if you could get that solidified heading into Big 12 play, with the exception of Iowa State, of course, I think that would be absolutely huge. And I would love to see that type of play. Before I get into the transfers, because I think there's obviously a few players that can make immediate impacts. That's the reason they went out and got them. I think you have to answer this question. And the fact that obviously you lose a guy like Jacob Parrish, who foregoes his final season to go to the NFL draft, there's a huge opportunity that he could be a top 100 pick come April in Green Bay, which I absolutely hope that's the case. I hope he goes to a really good team that he fits. I want to be able to cheer for him on Sundays for multiple years. But now the biggest question is who is going to be cornerback one heading into 2025? Now, I don't know if it's going to be a guy like Zashon Rich. I think I don't know if cornerback one is the right answer. I think he's going to make a huge impact, but who knows if it's going to be CB1 on game one. I think the right answer initially right now, before we see spring ball, before we see any type of practices, just when we're looking at it on paper, you probably have to give it the senior Justice James. Where do you think right now, if you had Justice James as your cornerback one, how comfortable do you feel? Maybe let's go scale 1 out of 10. How comfortable do you feel about this secondary heading into the new year?
This one I'm less high on, I will say. Probably about a 6. I feel like the experience is something important, but the guys
Of
behind
course.
him also, like, I don't know that this room currently has, like, a dominant cornerback one. They don't have a Jacob Parrish right now, but I also don't think that's such a bad thing right now. It's early, it's spring. Guys need to emerge individually, and not to say that Justice James can't, but he's had some of the injury history, he's gotten banged up, but he's also had some great plays here and there. Like, he's shown an ability to do it sporadically, but not so much consistently. My thing is this, last season, the secondary struggled, even though you had an NFL, top 100 pick in Jacob Parrish. The secondary was seeming to make miscommunications, a lot of that in the secondary, or a lot of that in the safety room. But I almost wonder if the title of cornerback one is almost overrated to what the full spread will be for K-State. Like we said, if you have 3 or 4 dudes that are solid rotation guys that can deal with guys in the Big 12, like, a T-Mac or different dudes like that, obviously those guys are generational receivers, but Jacob Parrish holds his own. Even Keenan Garber for a little bit held his own. Chris Kleiman is nothing if he's not a talent developer and a talent evaluator. Like, he's one dude that truly feels the guy's always going to have the right decision. Chris Klanderman's the same way, where even if the team struggles, even if they don't have this XYZ type guy or X Factor type guy, it still feels like the unit as a whole will be solid. You might have a gap here and there. You might have someone carve you up a play or two, but it feels to me like the notion of having a cornerback one might not be as prominent in the specific defense because you have 3 or 4 dudes that could on any night be a CB1.
I mean, and is that a bad problem to have? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think it's probably a good thing to look at, to be honest.
I love that. I'm okay with that answer. I think it's not the worst answer to have. No doubt about that whatsoever. Okay. Now let's put it all together because we talk about the secondary, obviously, and now we can talk about the safeties and the corners as a whole. Obviously, we know there was a huge concern to an extent about this secondary last season. Some might say that some of the reasons why some of those games were lost, but we won't go that far into it. But I want to go overall. We're talking about these new transfers coming in, and what do you see overall about this secondary to how we can make sure this secondary is more improved this next season? Let's finish that up right here on Locked On Kansas State. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. We're talking Kansas State football. We're talking the secondary because to me, I think this might be one of the most interesting topics heading into the new year. I think you could talk wide receivers because of the new change that's happened, which we just discussed on our last episode between the two of us. And then the cornerbacks, obviously the situation. And there's going to be a lot of really fun things with the coaching changes on the offensive side. There's just a lot of really fun topics that we are going to get to on this show. And I think we're going to have Joe join us, of course, on every Friday when we can to talk about some of these as well, when we get some of these deep dives and some of these really great comps, if you will. But again, make sure you check out his show at Joe Tillery. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it in the show description below as well. Help him get to 3,000 subscribers, because I think it is a show worth your while for sure. Really anything, Kansas State, Chiefs, Royals. I mean, you're talking YouTube strategy now. You got a lot of stuff going on over there, and it's all really good content. We're talking the secondary today. And what I really want to get into is, as I mentioned, I think Zashon Rich could be a huge impact for 2025. Justice James, can he be the cornerback one that we all hope and love he could be? We're a little skeptical on that. But the reason that we might be skeptical, and we might not be the only ones, there are multiple players that are coming in from the transfer portal. And we can name them all, and we'll go from corner and safety, if you will, because they kind of all flow together. We have, Amarion Fortenberry, I think, is probably the biggest name at the cornerback position coming over from South Alabama. He played a very high level of play for the Sun Belt last year. I think he's probably the biggest piece coming over for the defensive secondary. You have a guy like Gunnar Maldonado, who coming in for the safety position, who has leadership roles aspects, which could help that miscommunication portion. Now, he is coming over and dealing with some surgery that happened in October. He is going to miss spring ball, so that's something to keep in mind. But I don't think if any player had to miss spring ball, I think a guy like Gunnar is probably the one you'd hope for the case, because he has that experience in his belt. Let's just start with those two as we continue on. Oh, and we'll put one more. Let's put Jayden Rowe from Oklahoma, because I think he's going to wind up being a corner when it's all said and done. Let's stick to the cornerback side. I know I brought up the Gunners part, but let's talk about the corner side first. Putting in Zashon and McIntosh and James, and then you added players like Rowe and Fortenberry. Is this the kind of prediction or thought process that you're thinking about this rotation? Or do you see maybe a certain amount of these players stepping up and taking a bigger role? And if so, who do you have as that bigger role?
Well, I think it's natural to think about it as there's going to be, regardless of how good the rotation is, at some point there's going to be one or two dudes that step up, even if it's just from a leadership perspective and not necessarily from a play dominant perspective. There's going to be two dudes that are going to be on the field just more than the rest. It just works out that way naturally. But dudes that I feel like I almost sometimes forget about, like Amarion Fortenberry could absolutely be cornerback one for this team. I don't think anybody disputes that. And he was actually the fourth guy I was referring to. The fifth dude that I could completely slip my mind, like you said, Jayden Rowe has the most physically gifted body of anybody in that room. Obviously, Donovan McIntosh, 6'3". Jayden Rowe is an incredible athlete. 4.3 speed, 220, built like a linebacker, can fly, can do literally anything. His issue and his crux has been health. That being said, and I don't mean to bury anybody at Oklahoma because I don't know their strength staff that well, but genuinely, Coach True, Kansas State's strength and conditioning coach, has done so many incredible things in terms of development, even for guys that do have histories of, okay, this guy's been banged up here and there. How do we get the best for him? Jayden Rowe is a guy that could absolutely be an NFL first-round pick if he can stay on the football field. That's a dude that truly could be a dominant cornerback one that nobody wants to face. I mean, you want to talk about an athletic prospect, that's your guy right there. But you do have guys like Zashon Rich and Donovan McIntosh, Amarion Fortenberry. There's just going to be a lot of question marks in this room, but positive question marks at that.
Would you say that the cornerback position is the one that should be looked at the closest, maybe with a microscope for us, for spring ball this season? Like, compared to every other position, do you think you think it's fair to say that we should be paying attention to that position more than any other spot on the field come spring?
I would say it's probably 1A, and then I would think defensive end would also be 1B, just because for a different reason. But there is so many dudes that could genuinely be like NFL products in that room. Who actually plays for this defensive? Who starts for this team? Because there's guys that are like fifth and sixth on the depth chart that could be starters at another Big 12 team. I do think cornerback is the most pressing question of who is where, who's going to get this look, because there's just more question marks there. The pass rush spot, like, what do you do with Jayson Ross? What do you do with Travis Bates? What do you do with these guys? Chidi Obiizer has kind of established himself in that room, but how do you feel about, the fifth, sixth, and seventh guys in that room that are truly not that far behind the ones and the twos? So something to watch with them as well.
Fortenberry to me is an interesting case, and I know we probably could have an entire show on him. We probably will in the future, to be honest with you. But what he did at South Alabama, to me, I think the Sun Belt's one of the best G5 conferences in college football. I don't think I would be the only person that thinks that. But he played 13 games. He had 8 starts during his true freshman season at USA, 45 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss, 2 interceptions, and he carted 12 tackles. It was a season high, not against the Sun Belt team. He did that against LSU. which is really impressive. That shows that he is able to step up to that next level. And whether you believe LSU took a step backwards, and obviously they did in 2024 compared to their SEC run the year before, it is still South Alabama versus LSU. And a true freshman playing at a G5 level, being able to do something like that against an SEC team, that's a pretty impressive feat alone, knowing that that's coming to Kansas State.
Yeah, he's a pit bull, man. He really is. He's a guy that I feel like, he just doesn't go away. Like, it doesn't matter what receiver you set across from him, he doesn't go away. And I think even back to that game against Oklahoma State 2 years ago, obviously he wasn't there yet, but you think about that squad. South Alabama is one of the better squads in that league. Like, they're a program that has good facilities, good coaching, good players, ready for that next step forward. Like, you don't want to ever call a program like a developmental team for the next step up or something. Amarion Fortenberry felt like a guy that, hey, regardless of what happened in my true freshman season, the way it finished, you're going to be playing high level ball in the Big 12, SEC, Big 10. He was a guy that's ready for that next step.
Yeah, I think we got lucky with this one, to be completely honest, because I'm sure that other SEC schools and Big Ten
Yeah.
schools were going after him. And whatever the case may be, whatever Coach Kleiman and his recruiting staff found a way to say that you have maybe a better opportunity to be a starting corner at a Power 4 level. Maybe that was the fact of it, maybe the case. But whatever it was, it found him with the Wildcats. And I think we're going to be very excited for what we get out of him in 2025. Let's wrap this up and let's talk about the safety position as we finish this up, just kind of put all the secondary as a whole. I already talked about Gunnar Maldonado, and I think we can talk about him just a little bit, but we're not going to get to see him in spring. But overall, I think we are going to see a big impact from him in the fall, even if it's just at a leadership position. I think he's going to be a huge leader for this secondary, and it could be something, as we mentioned, because of all the miscommunications and things like that, just having that type of leader, a Big 12 leader, if you will, even from that as well. He has played in this league for multiple years. He is going to bring a lot of that over to Kansas State, and I think that's going to be huge. I think that might even be better than his production on the field, but he can also play. He's also a very good football player. Markevius Moss, though, I think this guy can be an absolute X factor. And I know we've talked about him in the past. I think there's a strong opportunity that he could be your starting jack come 2025. I mean, week 0, like coming out of Dublin, he might be holding the Guinness and being the jack safety. Like, he might be that dude. And I think he has a really strong opportunity of doing so. Putting it all together with the miscommunications that happened last year, with what we talked about with the cornerback position in 2024, with the safeties coming back to this roster, and obviously the 2 new ones coming in, where do you see the safety position going into Dublin?
You know what? I got to tell you, I think the safety position, there's going to be 2 spots that I think are going to be really, really good for Kansas State. I mean, you could say the receiver core, you could say the offense, the running back room, the quarterback. Like, there's a ton of different things you could say. The groups that I think will leave absolutely no question marks and no doubts, I think that safety group's going to be a top Chris Kleiman-led unit that we've seen in his time here. The linebacker room as well, no slight to them. I think those dudes are going to be ridiculous, but they've gotten their love already. The Gabe Powers addition alongside Des Purnell and Austin Romaine, that's an incredible group. The safety unit feels like dudes that every single one of them wants to win more than they want to breathe. Like, that's the thought I get about these dudes. Marquavius Moss, had his not preseason interview, but like, you got to meet the defense a couple weeks ago. They did kind of a press media round, and people talked to him about, hey, the JUCO rule, you get another year of eligibility. Are you planning on utilizing that, blah, blah. And he pretty much quickly said, no, I'm going to be here for 2 years and go to the NFL. And it wasn't a question of, should I use my next year? And I was like, that's the confidence I need in that safety room. I want a dude that's pissed off, trying to hurt the ground when he takes steps. Like, that's a dude I want in the secondary. For Gunnar Maldonado, like, if that dude can get back to even 80% of his play, which I think the surgery that they had, it sounded like there was some positivity there. It didn't sound like obviously a surgery is intensive regardless, but it didn't sound like to the extent
it was
that a lot
just
of
his
people predicted.
ACL too. It wasn't anything else. It was just his ACL.
Just the ACL. That's big. And I mean, obviously guys come back from ACLs here and there, but like fairly often. But if he can get back to that spot, he's a real dog in that room. And I mean, watching him on the field, he's been in Bill Snyder Family Stadium, didn't get to play there last year, but he's been there and he's seen the crowd already. I think he's going to be a fan favorite very fast.
Yeah, I think this defense is going to have a multiple fan favorites coming over from the transfer portal. I think Gunner's going to be one. I think Gabe Powers can be one. Markevius Moss can be one. I mean, there's plenty to talk about heading into. I mean, it's crazy. It feels like we have a lifetime away before Dublin, but as soon as we blink, it is going to be right here but we're going to make sure you have it every single step of the way. And we're going to talk about it till we're blue in the face, because it's going to be an absolute riot. This roster is going to be really fun to talk about and break down piece by piece this offseason. Joe, where can everyone find your work? What do you got coming up? And of course, how close are you to 3,000 subscribers?
And I think we're in the final 50 here. I think we've got about 40 something more. So we're getting close. So be sure to hit that link, boys, boys and girls watching. But just kind of hanging out. I'm excited. We'll see what happens with basketball. I don't want to pump the brakes too fast, but it's been an up and down season for sure. I'm excited for that next wave when the transfer portal opens up. That'll be a ton more to cover. But just kind of covering the team to the best of my ability and getting through it. You know how this point of the year hits. If you're not a competitive team in certain sports, it does take that and make it a little bit tougher. So being sure to be on top of it, doing the best I can for K-State football, K-State basketball is all about where I'm at right now.
I love it. And of course, you can find his show in the show notes before. If you want more from Joe and myself, we will be back Friday afternoon with some basketball talk. We're going to talk men's basketball and women's basketball as they head into the weekend, because there's a lot of question marks going on with both sides now, and some new news coming out with some exciting things with the women's side. And of course, the obvious elephant in the room: can the men's team still be a tournament team? We'll do that all right here later on Locked On Kansas State in the afternoon edition. So join us there for the next listen. Please like the video. Please subscribe. This has been Locked On Kansas State.